Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. I hope this episode finds you well, and if not, then we will include you in our prayers and kind thoughts. We hope to give you a diversion from real life for the next 90 minutes to 2 hours. We've got 2 new scary Dogman stories, plus the most interesting quarantine and virus Dogman stories that have surfaced recently. All of these allegedly true tales have to do with the current crisis in one way or another. We wanted to compile a number of these into one episode since they're all so defined by this current strange time we're all trying to get through. There's something that the wise have repeated to us going back into antiquity, and that is that the best way to get through something is to stop trying to get through it, to fully accept it, even the least desirable aspects of whatever it is at that current moment, and then, after accepting, begin work on trying to change the parts that you don't like. Some people rail against such an idea, calling it the acceptance of imprisonment. Well, yes, in a sense, we are all always imprisoned. And in another sense, even those of us literally in jail are all always free. Once you understand deeply how both states always constantly coexist, you can choose to be in your own freedom even while inside the deepest and most uncomfortable kind of captivity. This was a lesson learned by the person who sent us this first little tale, which he calls Trapped in a Rotted Cavity by Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have mild claustrophobia, so staying indoors had been kind of driving me a bit insane-y. I decided to go for a walk in the woods outside the place I'm staying at for the duration. I wish I hadn't, because it led to a horrifying and seemingly unending experience with the Dogman. I don't want to say where I live, but it is a forested area of the United States that I don't think has ever been associated with Dogman before. I know every state has been associated with Dogman by now, at least through hearsay, but I honestly never heard any of my neighbors ever discussing seeing it or Bigfoot in this area, and I have now lived in this part of this state for over 50 of my 75 years. I didn't grow up here, but I moved here in my 20s, and I've never left. We do have local ghost stories, and there are some UFO sightings not all that far from here, but this is not an area for the big hairy boogeyman type cryptids to the best of my knowledge. I had heard the term Dogman, but I was far more familiar with Bigfoot. I used to watch that Bigfoot TV series with all the tree knocking and howling, and I think it's possible they might be real. The stories I had heard of Dogman, though, they had just made me laugh. They didn't seem convincing at all, and I thought that people were either seeing mangy bears or sometimes oversized escaped dogs. Some wolves can grow to a massive size in the wild, especially up in Alaska. The idea of real werewolves, though, that seemed humorous to me. I figured it was only believed in by the most gullible types of people. Well, life has a way of humbling the haughty. I got knocked off my high horse, and I almost didn't live to tell the tale, because I got pulled down by the Dogman. Where I am staying during this crisis, much of the forest is quite old. There are some living trees so old and tall and wide that it takes me a few minutes to walk around them. There are dead, rotted out old tree trunks large enough to sit and eat your lunch inside of. I came here to shelter in place for the duration with one live-in caretaker that we can call Michelle. She doesn't like me going for walks through the woods alone, so I have to do it after she's gone to sleep or before she wakes up in the morning. At any rate, I found myself walking around in the dark to avoid her draconian safety rules. There is such a thing as being too safe, and then again, there is such a thing as being sorry. One morning before dawn, I was trotting around trying to find a path through those woods I hadn't already walked down. I found a tree I had never seen before that had a big black hole in the center that reminded me in the dark of a portal of some sort, like a science fiction kind of thing. I shined the flashlight on my phone at the black portal and saw that it was actually a big hole in the center of the trunk in this tree that still seemed to be alive in other aspects. There were some buds growing on the tree branches. It was not a dead tree, and yet there was this cavity in the center so large that I could climb into it. I looked at the spider webs inside there, and I thought back on when I was younger. I would have already been clearing out the cobwebs and trying the tree on for size back then. I'm 3/4 of a century old now, so I'm supposed to be too mature to do things like that. Plus, if I got stuck in there, I doubt Michelle would even know where to look for me. After all, I had only just found this particular tree myself that morning. I sighed in memory of my youth and continued walking along the path until I saw, off in the distance between some trees, some large predator feeding. I don't know what it was feeding on, I couldn't see that. Instantly hiding myself behind a bush, I peered out to see what kind of predator I had encountered. With its head down while eating, I couldn't make out enough features to know if it was a bear or a big cat or what. As I watched silently, holding my breath and trying not to move, the creature lifted its head, and for about 2 seconds, I got a really good look at its profile. It was neither bear nor cat. It was canine. The head turned forward before returning to eating, and the eyes on the dog glowed. I had not seen dogs' eyes do that before. It reminded me of how cats' eyes glow, but this was kind of a golden yellow glow, and it set off an alarm bell inside my head. I wasn't remembering why, but I was remembering that yellow eye glow from a dog was not a good thing. I wanted to be somewhere else. I wanted to get back to the place where I'm staying. I didn't want my story to end there in the forest that morning. For one thing, it would prove Michelle right. She'd tell all my relatives how I didn't listen to her. I couldn't let her win out for all eternity. I started to stand up, but it's not as easy to do as it used to be, and I accidentally dropped my glasses from my shirt pocket. It made a noise when it hit the dirt, so as I snatched them up, I also looked quickly to see if the dog had noticed them dropping. He was looking in my direction, his eyes glowing that scary way. As I watched, he raised himself up off the ground, first to a squatting position, not like a dog sitting, but more like a hunter, and then to a bipedal standing position like that of a human. It was walking on its hind legs in my direction before I had even accepted the fact that I had just seen a dog stand up like a man. My brain was like, wow, that dog stood up. And my body was like, the bipedal dog is coming toward us. And my mind was still like, wow, a standing dog, man. So my body started running, and I was only sort of half present as it did so. I found myself, the inner child now fully in control of my actions, climbing into that tree with the cavity inside it. I found myself wiping the cobwebs and caterpillars away so I could hunker down as small as possible inside that cavity. It wasn't comfortable to be there, and I knew I would have to shift around periodically if I wanted to continue feeling all my body parts, but I was hopefully out of view of the Dogman. I looked up at the hole in the tree above me, watching the tops of the trees blow in the pre-dawn breeze, and listening to the sound of the Dogman walking around in places I couldn't see. It dawned on me that the best case scenario was that I would need to stay there till dawn, and the worst case was that the Dogman would pull me out of the tree and do to me whatever it is that dogmen do to crazy old fools. The claustrophobia was making me feel like Jonah swallowed up in the whale. I wondered when exactly I had acquired the claustrophobia. I never had it as a kid. I used to climb inside everything. I guess it was during my painful first marriage. 8 wasted and trapped years, working in a cubicle, coming home to an icicle. My stomach cramped up just thinking about it, and I felt momentarily nauseous. Isn't it amazing how I was trapped in a tree, hiding from the Dogman? But the memory of a former wife and job are what made me feel ill? I mean, think about that. I was possibly in literal physical danger, yet my mind was upset about things that didn't matter anymore. It struck me in the moment how shockingly absurd that was. If I wasn't even going to be mentally present at my own finish by the claws and teeth of a mythical predator, when was I going to be present? What was it going to take? I remembered someone who seemed wise once telling me that when I got stressed, I could still relax if I controlled and slowed my breathing. I decided this would be a good time to try to behave more wisely, and I slowed my breathing. Sometimes I would close my eyes. Other times I would stare straight forward at the inside of the tree in front of me. I began to chill a bit, finally, and I discovered that once my mind shut up about pointless nonsense from the past, or anxiety about the future, my nervous system became far more opened up to perceiving what was actually happening in that very moment all around me. I could hear the Dogman, but I could also sense where he was coming from and where he was going to. I could tell he was still looking for me, and I could tell I was still in danger. Without even thinking about it, I found myself picking up old leaves from last autumn that had blown into the hole in the tree, and I rubbed them onto my head and face. I guess I was hiding my scent, I'm not sure, but it seemed the natural thing to do, and I was following instinct, no longer actually thinking. At least, I had ceased thinking in words. I had become as alert as I was still able to be at my age, and I slowed my breathing further as the creature approached from my right rear. He would soon be passing in front of the hole, and I would have the privilege of staring up from beneath at an impossible and fictional monster come to life and pursuing me in the early morning hours. As the monster appeared, I stared in awe. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It seemed somehow unlike anything else that exists in nature. It was much smarter looking than a bear or a dog, but smarter in a different way than humans. It was another way evolution had chosen to go. That's kind of how I felt as I gazed up at the underside of its chin, watching the still, fresh, thick red liquid drip off from his recent feast. He did not seem manic. He was not pursuing me out of hunger. He had just filled his belly. He was chasing me out of curiosity. I was certain all I had to do was wait him out. He would need to nap soon after his meal, and the sun was already beginning to light the leaves at the very tops of some of the trees. Judging by the eyes on this guy, he was a nocturnal predator, and so it was getting to be his bedtime. Once the creature walked on, I began to try to get out of the tree. That's when I discovered that it wasn't going to be as easy as all that. My legs and butt had all fallen asleep. I was going to have to slowly pull myself up by my arms, then allow my legs to regain their circulation and slowly their strength. I found myself in awkward position after awkward position for about the next half hour. before I was finally able to climb out of the tree and begin to trot homeward toward my shelter. I have to say I felt quite triumphant having survived my own little adventure. Michelle had a different assessment of the situation, which she shared not only with me, but with my entire family over Skype. She got to win and I was forced to live through it. She was making me feel like I wished I had passed on in that tree just so I didn't have to hear about how bad I was. If you want me to behave, stop telling me to behave all the time. That's kind of my philosophy. And another thing that's happened since that event that almost ended everything for me is that most of my claustrophobia seems to have vanished. It no longer serves any purpose for me. Being in the house is the same as being outside, is the same as being back in the city. Once you realize that the brain can't tell the difference between the real or the vividly imagined experience, then it no longer matters if you're in a $30 million mansion or in a prison cell. Both are equally free and equally locked down, as we all live in our minds, at least as much as we live in the actual world around us. For some of us, this crisis will spell the end of everything, and to those people and their families I send my deepest empathy. For many of the rest of us, it may actually help us to get past some of our anxieties through experience, not through psychology or mentation. Sometimes harder times can be hidden gifts if we manage to live through them. And as proof, I acquired these insights because I was trapped in a rotted cavity by Dogman. Bigfoot will return with another all-new story at the end of this episode. It's called Chased to My Cabin by Dogman, so don't miss it. Hi, I'm Henry Lee Dogman, and I'll be here with a Dogman story myself later in this episode. But right now, let's cut to that dude. What's his name again? He looks like a big gorilla. Have you ever seen a cryptid? Have you ever experienced something that might have been supernatural or paranormal? Have you ever spoken with friends or family who have? Is it usually a really long story, or is it quite often something that happened so quickly, almost all they can say about the incident is what the anomalous creature or phenomenon looked like and how it made them feel? We get contributions along the lines of the latter quite often, but we tend to usually go with the longer stories, since they have more meat on their bone, or for our vegan friends, more tofurkey. Today, we've got a collection of short but still scary and strange Dogman cryptid encounters. But before we get to that, I'd like to introduce our newest executive producer, Jamali Lee. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Jamali just joined us this morning, and we greatly appreciate their contribution, especially during this time when it's harder for so many people to be able to help out. It's just a miracle that new people are stepping up. It's quite humbling, really. If you want to be a heroic, scary stories executive producer like Jamali Lee, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You get over 7 hours of secret, uncensored scary stories right off the bat. Plus, we do a new uncensored scary story each Sunday. And now let's jump into our new collection of 4 strange yet brief cryptid encounters. This first one is particularly creepy, and we call it the Dingmans Ferry Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had a Dogman experience that happened to me just last week out here on Park Road near the Dingmans Ferry stone quarry. My buddy and I, who both saw the creature, have started calling that town Dogman's Ferry ever since then. As I said, we had just passed the stone quarry and were on Park Road just after dark when we saw a very tall man, dressed all in shiny black, stumble out of the woods on the right of the road. My buddy made a sarcastic comment about how that guy wasn't drunk enough yet. I saw the figure recover his balance gracefully, and I said something to that effect. He probably just tripped. It was then that I noticed the freakish-looking head on the guy. At first I thought it was something placed over the man's head, but the way it moved betrayed the fact that this was, in and of itself, the actual head of that man. And I would have to say that this guy's head looked quite canine. It had dog-like eyes, not human-like. Its nose, or really snout, was long like a dog's. Its ears were more wolf-like and stood up on top of its head. The black bodysuit he was wearing suddenly appeared to me as it actually was. Shiny black fur covering a body that was in some ways humanoid, and in other ways, markedly canine. Our driving past took the fellow by surprise. He dropped down to a squatting position as he noticed us, at once a defensive and yet threatening posture to take. And when he did that, he looked more like an animal than a man. And so I thought, that's what he must be. But then, we watched as it stood up like a man and ran back into the trees off the road on its hind legs. To be honest, I can't say for sure what I was looking at. If it was a human, he was wearing a dog head mask. At least to me that's what the head looked like, a dog. My buddy says its dark black coloring made it look like Anubis, the ancient Egyptian jackal-headed god. He said it couldn't have been Anubis though, because Anubis wouldn't stagger around the forests of Pennsylvania drunk off his godly butt. Actually, I'm pretty sure the ancient gods could drink most modern deities under the table, but I don't think the dog-headed or jackal-headed man that we saw was inebriated. I think he just slipped when climbing out of the woods, and he was taken by surprise when we drove by. He looked so stunned to see us that I wondered if he had ever even seen a car before. And of course, that opens up another bunch of cans of worms. Where was that creature from that it would be unfamiliar with automobiles? Or maybe I should be asking when it was from. Could it have walked in from an ancient or future era? Could it have staggered in from an alternate reality? Or was it a drunk furry in a costume tripping and falling out of the woods because it couldn't see out of its dog head mask? Since whoever or whatever it was ran back into the woods, I imagine we will most likely never be able to answer any of these questions about the Dingmans Ferry Dogman. The Shaky Graves Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This story happened almost a year ago, back in May 2019, when we were all still free to go anywhere we wanted and watch bands perform. I had traveled that night to upstate New York with my younger brother to see one of his favorite musicians, a guy from down south who calls himself Shaky Graves. It was a kind of music I wasn't really all that familiar with called Americana, but it was a good show, and I liked it. My brother was ecstatic, excited to have seen one of his favorite performers live, but also to have introduced me to the guy's work. We had a lot of fun, and when it was over, we had a 3-hour-long drive home ahead of us. That was when we encountered what the two of us still call the Shaky Graves Dogman. We were both still pretty excited as we drove away from the upstate concert hall. My brother was bouncing in his seat, telling me which parts of the show were his favorites. Eventually, he fell asleep, and I drove through the night myself. I don't remember when the show let out, but it was well after midnight before we were even halfway home. The majority of the trip back to Seekonk, Massachusetts, where we both lived at the time, consisted of us taking I-90 west. When we got to Providence, we cut through the city and East Providence until we caught up with Route 44, which would take us back to Massachusetts. It was there that my brother woke up with a start, claiming that we were being watched and followed. Now, I admit my brother is more into art and music than I am, but he is not an oddball nutjob. And on the other hand, he's not a psychic. He's never awakened and made a statement like that before. I don't even know what to call it. I want to say he was making predictions or prophecies, but he wasn't. He was somehow claiming higher awareness of what was going on right at that moment, out in the land surrounding us. According to him, we had been singled out as prey, and we were being stalked, even at that very moment. I asked him how he knew all that, and he already was becoming confused as to what exactly I was quizzing him about. He had begun to forget the things he had just said, showing that he must have been still asleep when he was speaking. I started wondering if that should add or subtract weight from the message he seemed to so urgently need to convey before he woke up again. I mean, was there something I should do differently? If we were under attack in some odd sense, shouldn't I just continue to do what I was doing, which was to drive us home as quickly as possible? My brother may not have been able to remember exactly what his dream was about, or what he had just said, but he didn't seem as happy as he had earlier. He kept looking around outside as though he were expecting to see something beside the sparse late-night traffic and the trees rushing past on either side. When we got over to where that building is that looks like a shack, that was when we both saw it at once. Out of the trees between the shack and the next address over walked the strangest thing I have ever seen. I thought I was seeing Bigfoot at first because of the sheer size of it, but the legs were all wrong. They looked more like goat or horse legs, and that really creeped me out and gave me the vibe that this was something demonic, or the work of the devil, or something along those lines. I'm not religious, but seeing that thing last year put the religion inside me fast. It was walking out from the trees to our left, walking over toward other trees to our right onto Route 44. I think it's called Taunton Road over there, if I'm not mistaken. So both my brother and I gasped in unison, as though we had rehearsed it. Once the creature took a step or two out onto the road, though, we got to see the top half of his body more clearly, and we gasped together, all over again. Its head was totally not like a goat or a horse or a devil. It was this sort of werewolf kind of a thing, except its head looked far more like an actual wolf or canine than the werewolves in the movies I had seen. Of course, I'm not really a huge horror fan, or I wasn't back then. I've since seen movies like Dog Soldiers, which are a lot closer to what we saw than Lon Chaney's The Wolfman would have been. This creature was taller in the legs and chest than the Dog Soldiers creatures, though, and the necks were shorter and angled forward. I think it was used to dealing with creatures smaller than itself, and it walked around looking downward as a consequence. I can't think of anything that might be taller than what we saw, unless Sasquatch or Bigfoot really do exist, and if they are really as tall as people say they are. After seeing what my brother and I saw, I would have to say that I'm now a lot more inclined to accept what other people report concerning cryptids. It stops seeming like such a crazy thing after you see one yourself. This creature was not black. It was not dark brown. It was colored more like a wolf or a German shepherd. It was mostly a combination of light browns, warm grays, and tan colors, with darker markings around the face, around the eyes, making them stand out, and on its tail, which it carried high behind it. We watched as the creature walked bipedally across the entire highway in about 4 steps, and it disappeared to our right in the woods. My brother turned as we passed it, trying to see it a little bit longer. I don't know if he succeeded, but he began shouting that this was proof that we were being watched and we were being stalked. I told him that the creature hadn't even looked at us, it only walked past us, and he sniffed at me that I knew nothing of the ancient ways of stalking. I have no idea what he meant by that, but he was right. I have no idea what he was talking about, and so I just focused on driving the rest of the way home, which was uneventful. We were both annoyed at each other when we finally got back, each having different theories about what we had seen and what it actually meant. By the next morning, though, we were talking it over excitedly. We had made a pact to go back this year to Route 44 on May 15th, on the first anniversary of our one and only ever cryptid sighting. As I said, we took to calling him the Shaky Graves Dogman or Shaky Jr., or sometimes just Master Graves. Our plan was to go back to the spot on the road by that shack-type building, park the car, see if we were brave enough to get out of the car, and then we were going to share a 40, spilling some of it on the ground for the Dogman. It's not looking good for us being able to make the trip this year, at least not on the first anniversary of May 15th. My brother is sheltered in a different state than Massachusetts right now, and I'm not sure if he'll be able to make it. Maybe if I'm able to manage a drive-by on the date in question, I can live stream it to my brother. I know he definitely wants a second chance to see the Shaky Graves Dogman. My wife scared away a Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a short Dogman encounter to tell you about for your show. It has to do with my cat, Old Yeller. We call him that because he's yellow, but also because he likes to pick fights and yell a lot. One time, a stray dog came into our yard and we were alerted to this fact by Old Yeller. We came out to the backyard and watched as this 8-pound cat scared off a large lost dog. It was pretty comical. My wife told me that she saw Yeller do the same thing one time with a bear cub, and I only wish I could see video of that event. Old Yeller may be a cat, but he thinks he's a guard cat, and I never found anyone willing to tell him different. At least not until Old Yeller met the Dogman. My wife and I were awakened one night just the other day by screeching and growling and hissing sounds like we had never heard before. Either something terrible was happening in our backyard, or it was about to start. We rushed out back to find something that I'm pretty sure neither me nor my wife ever expected to see anywhere, but most especially not in our backyard in New Jersey. Right there, in the middle of the yard, was my cat, his back fur standing on end, trying to make his tiny self look as big as possible, absolutely freaking out at the biggest bipedal land animal I'd ever seen in my life, which was standing just a few feet away from it. It was standing like a man, but it was some kind of furry creature. It was dark all over, with bright shining eyes, and a tongue hanging out of its dog-like head. It had floppy ears and panted like a canine, yet it stood up as it interacted with our cat. When it would try to reach out toward the cat, Old Yeller would positively freak out, hissing and scratching and snapping at the giant Dogman. He would pull back each time, same as you would if Yeller went after you. He means business. And so does my wife. Before I knew what was happening, she had rushed past me and was charging onto the lawn. Now that Dogman had 2 angry creatures screeching at him, and that was too much. He ran off into the woods, and I would say that's proof that he must have some wisdom inside him. As the creature left, both the cat and my wife walked after him, hissing and lecturing and telling him what was what. I couldn't really believe what I was seeing on the one hand, but on the other hand, if I were that Dogman, I would have run away too. I really wonder if these things are coming out into our territory because most of us are locked up inside. I wonder if they're sort of testing to see if we're abandoning our turf or what. It makes me nervous because next time that Dogman might come back with 1 or 2 of his family with him. We keep Old Yeller inside all the time now, which he is miserable about. Come to think of it, I've been keeping my wife inside as well, and she isn't any happier either. I'm taking a very serious, no joking response, even though it was kind of comical that my wife scared away a Dogman.
My, what a nice spring evening. Wow, whatever made that howl sure sounded close. It's amazing how even the prettiest spring sunset can turn scary when there's a chance that the Dogman may be near. I'm Madeline Starr, and I'll be hosting the Dogman Scary Springtime Special right here on Scary Stories NYC. And now, here's another scary Dogman story.
I saw Dogman in my treehouse. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a Dogman story for you that took place many, many years ago in the town I grew up in, Greenville, Michigan. This story goes way, way back to the late 1960s. My father and uncle had built a treehouse for my older brother that they forced him to share with me. He wanted to keep it for him and his older friends. He didn't want little kids allowed in there. Eventually, we adopted a system where I could use the house when he wasn't in it, but whenever he wanted it back, I would have to get out. It wasn't really a fair agreement, but he was bigger, and back then, that was how things were decided among kids. I'm not sure I would have cared so much about spending time in the treehouse if I had known that it would bring me face to face with an actual, living, breathing Michigan Dogman. One day, my brother had used the treehouse all day and it was almost time for supper when he finally vacated. I knew our mother was going to be calling me in for dinner in just a few minutes, but I had waited all day to get to use the treehouse, and now I was going to use it. It really was already a lot darker out than it had ever been before when I was going up the ladder to the wooden structure. I felt as though I were doing something wrong, but I knew I wasn't officially doing anything wrong as long as I ran inside once my mother called. So I kept climbing. When I reached the top, I poked my head up and looked around the one-room treehouse from the level of the floor. It was dark in there, but I had brought my father's flashlight with me. I shone it into the treehouse, and I swear, looking right back at me, eyes glowing a bright yellow, was the face of an honest-to-God Michigan Dogman. I dropped my father's flashlight down the entire length of the ladder and I heard it break when it hit the ground. I screamed and tried to climb down the ladder fast, giving myself a bad splinter in the process. I ran inside screaming, and I remember my mother comforting me. I told her there was a dog-headed monster in the treehouse and that I got a splinter running away from it. She treated my splinter and consoled me. When my father came home later, he punished my older brother, grounding him for a month. Dad was convinced that somehow the Dogman was actually a trick left by my older brother specifically to scare me. Didn't matter how much I told my father that what I saw was real, he still punished my brother. And then, in secret, my brother punished me for getting him in trouble. It didn't matter how much I defended him, he still blamed me for his getting grounded. So we all had a horrible month because I saw Dogman in my treehouse. Today's executive producer, I'm speaking about none other than GBBWSA from the comments. Thank you, GBBWSA. Especially right now with everything going on and so many fewer people having the option of donating. Your contribution means a great deal and is extremely appreciated. And if any of the rest of you would also like to be a Scary Stories executive producer like GBBWSA, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. If you can't do that, liking, subscribing, hitting the notifications button, and sharing our videos with your friends all help us just as much and are very appreciated, as well as leaving a nice comment down below. Speaking of appreciating, that's what I hear toilet paper stock is doing. Da-da-da. If you're in a rural area right now, please let us know in the comments if you're still able to get deliveries to be made. How are you getting supplies, or are you staying at home and subsisting on what you've already managed to collect for yourself beforehand? This next story contains a lot of opinion and conjecture on the part of the witness. These opinions are not proven facts, and we may not share those opinions. I feel like we have to leave them in, though, because this guy's ideas about what he saw seem inextricable from his narrative. This will be our adaptation of alleged witness testimony presented as entertainment. This might be someone trolling us, or it might have some validity, I don't really know. I only know two things. One, I think this story is kind of creepy. And two, the title of it is Dogman blocking deliveries. Dear Scary Stories NYC, before all this current situation set in, I volunteered to drive food out daily to some elderly people and families. It started out as 4 houses, then expanded to 8. 2 of them are not old or at-risk families, but they're rich and offered to pay me for my effort. I had to take those gigs on to afford to continue delivering to the elderly and ill. I didn't think I would have to at first, but my income has dropped far more sharply during this period than I had originally expected it might. Well, we've switched to weekly deliveries now. Some of the reasons why are obvious, and I'm sure you can already guess them. But one reason I don't think anyone would have guessed is that my deliveries were being blocked by the Dogman. Each week, I check the weather reports, and I choose a day to make my deliveries. Then, I let everyone know via email when they can expect the food. Why do I check the weather? Because the Dogman that bothers me only comes out in overcast weather. He's so afraid of the sun that I've come to call him the rainy day Dogman. The people who own the property that I'm afraid to drive on are of course the ones that pay me the most to service them. In fact, the cash they give me pays 80% of the bills of my volunteer work. My life is a whole lot easier if I can make my delivery to them first and get paid. But I really don't want to have to risk running into the dog-headed thing ever again. The first time I delivered to that estate, it was a sunny day, and I was amazed at how large the grounds were and how much it felt like driving back through time. Once you're past the main gate, you still have to drive through a forest and around the sides of a winding hill road before you get to the house. There's a covered wooden bridge that creaks loudly when I drive over it, and always feels to me like it's about to fall. That first day when I drove over it, it was bright and sunny, as I said, with spring birds singing. But the first time I tried to reach the house on an overcast, rainy day during a windy thunderstorm, I found the look of the old bridge like something out of a nightmare. How different a little thunder and lightning and rain makes a thing look. I found myself slowing the car to a crawl as I approached the bridge. It looked sturdy enough to hold my car. Probably. Maybe. I assumed it was slippery inside there, and I decided to take the bridge super slowly. From outside, the covered part of the bridge was hidden from me by complete darkness. As I eased my foot ever so gently down onto the gas, wanting to edge us carefully and slowly forward, we drove under the cover, and for the first second or two, as my eyes adjusted, I thought I saw something darting from left to right. I stared where I thought the silhouette had moved, but was then distracted by the loud, groaning sounds that the bridge was making underneath me as the weight of my car advanced out upon it. That's only the sound of the wood bending and expanding with the weight and the rain, I told myself, as though that meant anything real at all. It might also be the sound of the bridge about to collapse. How was I to know? I'm not a bridge engineer. I was getting frustrated, but my eyes were adjusting to the darkness at the same time. And then, my attitude adjusted too, as I looked up, and there it was. Standing in the far end of the covered bridge, blocking the exit with its massive form, was some kind of demonic man-like figure. I gasped and immediately hit the brake once I perceived how large this guy was. I was looking at some kind of giant-sized man. He was like a taller Arnold Schwarzenegger with devil horns on top and eyes that glowed brightly like Batman in the cartoon shows. I remembered that I was driving on the property of rich people, and that sometimes rich people can be eccentric. Sometimes they prank others in elaborate, mind-blowing ways. I knew this from experience for a fact, so it did go through my mind. that I might be getting punked or whatever. But the lightning crashed down, flashing on and off a few times in quick succession, giving me a series of very brief moments of seeing the big man fully lit up, very brightly. Those weren't devil horns. Those were his ears. It had some kind of a jackal head, this demon man, not a devil head. It was covered in fur. It was not a man at all. It was an animal from hell that stood on its hind legs. It was the rainy day Dogman, and it was now entering the covered bridge, marching forward to get me. I put the car in reverse and squealed out of there, almost spinning out as I hit the mud and tried to make the fastest U-turn in world history. Arnold Schwarzenwolfen followed me for about 200 or 300 yards before he gave up and let me drive off. At no point did the animal drop to all fours, yet I could tell by the shape and movement of its legs that it was not a man in a costume. One other time I saw the thing standing alongside the road as I drove back to town. I only saw a dark shape of the dog-eared man, but its bright eyes shining out at me gave it away. It just watched me that time and made no advance on my car. The last time I drove onto that property on an overcast day was the last time I ever will. On that occasion, as I drove down the long road toward the house where the ancient trees lining the drive meet at the top over your head, my heart jumped up into my throat as something heavy landed hard on top of my car's roof. I had a sickening feeling I already knew what it was before I saw the head of the demon dog staring at me upside down from the passenger seat window. The weightlifter werewolf had fallen from the trees onto my car. It had been laying in wait for me, or at least for someone. I didn't have time to wonder about the creature's intentions toward me as I spun us around and floored the pedal toward the front gate of the property. Lightning flashed and thunder shook the ground as we sped back toward the streets of the town. If the Dogman on my roof wanted to go for a ride to the police station, he was invited to continue hanging on up there. I was banking everything on the creature behaving like an animal. I was hoping it would leap off and run back to the forest once it figured out my intention to expose it to the people who lived in the nearby town. I could feel the weight remove itself from the car as the creature darted off behind some trees and behind me out of my view. I eased up on my speed so that I could get back to normal driving, and then I was out of there. To be honest, I can't even take being in that place in the bright sunlight, and when I talk to anyone in the family about it, they all think it's really funny. They say there's no such thing as werewolves, but they have to have seen it. They must know it's there. It's probably one of their uncles or something, who knows? I tell you, that family are a big reason why I can't wait for all this stuff going on around the world right now to finally get over with. I hope all of you are staying safe and healthy, and my heart goes out to those of you who are not. Besides all the normal safety precautions, if I were you, I'd also take extra precautions to avoid going into known Dogman territory on overcast days. You don't want to risk running into the rainy day Dogman blocking deliveries. I stopped Dogman from attacking my dog. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when my wife and I were finally able to get our own home, we decided we needed a dog as well. His name is Homer. I built him a doghouse to put in our backyard for him to sleep in. My wife's one condition of getting a dog was that he sleep outdoors. And as long as the weather was okay, I didn't think the 2-year-old German Shepherd mix would mind. I specifically wanted an older animal who had less chance of being adopted. My wife, who we can call Zelda, isn't good with babies. You got to be mature around her or she gets impatient. So we found an adult dog to move into our adult home. Everything seemed fine at first. Where we live is the middle of Pennsylvania. I'm not going to say where exactly, but that entire area has been known for weirdness since before I was born. I'm originally from North Carolina, but my wife is a native of this area, and that's how we first met, online. It was in a forum or a news group or whatever they used to call those things back then. We were both interested in cryptids of Pennsylvania. I'm the world's hugest Stan Gordon fan, and I can't get enough of stories about Pennsylvania cryptids. They just aren't the same as stories from any other place on the planet. Oh, sure, you can read stories of Bigfoot from elsewhere and stories of UFOs from elsewhere too. In Pennsylvania, though, you get Bigfoot and UFOs happening at the same time in the same places. The closest thing I can think which compares to it would probably be Skinwalker Ranch, but the PA hauntings, sightings, and encounters are just entirely and completely 100% unique and bafflingly weird. So when investigators ask a witness if they had a prior interest in cryptids before their sighting, my wife and I would both have to answer with a resounding yes. Bear that in mind as you consider what I'm about to tell you. It's possible that our prior knowledge and awareness of various phenomena might have colored or flavored our interpretations of the phenomena that we did witness. It's possible we had preconceived notions going into this which may have blinded us in ways which we were not conscious of at the time. Our house is large enough that we think we could have 2 children while still having a guest room if we were to shuffle things around. Right now we're childless, but there hasn't been money for a family. We'll see how finances are later in the year, I suppose. All our decisions are made that way. My wife decides intellectually when is the best time for eating, exercising, working, and even romance. Everything is scheduled and shuffled for the sake of efficiency. I would argue, but for the most part, her reasoning is solid and it does cut down on your overall work if you do things with greater efficiency. Ha! Now I'm speaking robot talk like my wife. Our backyard is small, but surrounded on 3 sides by a thick woods. I think each side is owned by different people, but as of now it's all undeveloped and we wander it as though it belonged to us. If we do eventually have a family, I wonder how much of the forest will be left for them to see. If their childhood is just going to be full of chainsaws and jackhammers tearing down the woods to put up condominiums or whatever, then I hope we will have the available finances to move to a different location. But as of now, this is the closest thing to heaven that Zelda and I have been able to find. Out in that small backyard is our only child to date, young Homer. My wife has grown to accept him for the most part, and he's become my good buddy. He's quite obedient and well-behaved, but he's got a wild streak, and he yearns to hunt and to eat every living thing in the state, as well as a number of cars. He stops barking if I ask him only one time, and he instantly stops chasing animals upon my command as well. I can't imagine what kind of problem his previous humans had with him. He's the best behaved and friendliest dog I've ever known. We have a small wooden back porch with 2 steps leading down to Homer's area. His house looks like Snoopy's doghouse from Charlie Brown, but much larger. He can fit inside entirely, and there's a clear rubber or plastic flap on the entrance. This way he can get in and out when he wants, and he can see out when he's inside. Also, it keeps him warmer in there if it's a chilly day or night. Like I said, at first, everything was working out just as planned, and all 3 of us seemed to be happy with the arrangement. But then came the 4th ingredient to the mix. The Dogman. I woke up one night about 6 or 7 weeks after Homer had first moved in, and I thought I heard angry dog noises from outside. I had been dreaming that I was having a play fight with Homer, but then he turned savage and started growling and snarling at me as though he really meant it. I lay there half awake in bed, unsure if I had dreamed the sounds or if I had actually heard them. After some time, I heard the sounds of a dog whining and growling from the backyard. I would like to say that I ran out immediately to see if my precious dog friend was okay, but instead, I sighed heavily and felt sorry for myself that I had to put on my bathrobe and go see what the problem was. Homer's probably seeing a squirrel, I thought, harumphing and making other annoyed noises as I slowly rose from my bed, as though I were doing someone else a favor, instead of looking out for my own dog and my own home. Eventually, when I opened the back door and stepped out on the cold porch in my bare feet, I got to see something that you just don't see every day. I saw my dog, chained to his doghouse, literally dragging the house behind him, trying to get close enough to attack a dark figure standing in the shadows. At first, all I could see of the target of Homer's ire was that it seemed to be the tallest man in the world. And then, something happened that really surprised me. The figure in the shadows made a bluff charge at my dog, I guess to get him to back off. Whoever that was in the forest charged out, heading straight for Homer and barking even more loudly and savagely at him than Homer was barking at the running figure. And then, when you would have expected my dog to back off, I saw the most incredible thing. Homer charged forward. So both of these two angry, barking entities were about to smack faces like young lovers, and I was going to see what kind of idiot was deliberately provoking my dog. As it turned out, it was something that I will never be able to unsee. The dark, running figure emerged into the glow of my house lights, and I could see it was a basketball player tall humanoid figure, apparently cosplaying as a furry. It ran at my dog full speed, clearly assuming that Homer was going to run away with his tail between his legs. Instead, my dog Homer charged forward to the limit of his chain's length, and then he stood up on his hind legs, snapping at the furry's face just as the furry was snapping at him. Dig, if you will, this picture. My German Shepherd Homer, standing on his hind legs, chained by his neck to his doghouse behind him, trying to reach up to bite at a 6.5 or 7 foot tall, furry, upright walking figure like a Bigfoot. But as those two faces snarled at each other and came close to biting each other simultaneously, I saw, in that brief moment, each creature's face contort in such a way that there could be no doubt that these were both actual biological entities charging at each other. The one I had assumed was a furry was clearly surprised by Homer's reaction, and his eyes went wide. A costume's eyes don't react that way. The creature opened its mouth, and I could see every tooth. I could see its long tongue. I could see its black lips. This was another canine, another dog, attacking my dog for some reason. I was horrified and obviously not fully awake yet. I ran down off the porch, screaming like I was a berserker. I was so infuriated that some dog would think to attack Homer. I was just outraged. I ran directly toward the larger dog, screaming curse words mixed with utter furious gibberish and nonsense. I had never been so freaking angry in my life before. As I ran to the fight going on between the two of them, I saw the stranger dog eyeing me. It clearly didn't want to be involved in a 2-against-1 fight, so it ran off, back into the woods, exiting faster than I would have thought possible. As it did so, I could see that it had never returned to all 4 legs. It ran off bipedally, and it seemed quite adept at moving in such a manner. It leaped over a bush that had to have been 3 feet high or higher before I couldn't see it any longer. But it ran like a human hurdler, not like an animal. The way it held its front legs, it seemed to be acting as though they were arms instead. It acted as though it was a man, but it was clearly a very large dog. It was so utterly confusing that once I realized what I had just charged at, all the sweat on my body froze, and I got terrible chills. When I wonder what would have happened to me if that thing hadn't decided to run off, I get those chills back each time. So Homer came inside with me after that. Now he sleeps on his old blanket on the floor by my side of the bed. This way I can reach down in the middle of the night and make sure he's safe and warm. Zelda is unhappy with all of this, but she didn't see the size and the bad attitude of that Dogman. I did. It had no reason to be going after Homer, but it did anyway. It's a bad actor, to say the least. He seems cruel to me. He seems evil. But as long as the monster is nocturnal, and as long as Zelda can deal with Homer sleeping inside, we've achieved a stalemate. So maybe we've reached a sort of a happy ending because I stopped Dogman from attacking my dog. Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm Henry Lee Dogman, filling in for Bigfoot, who's busy staring at you from inside the woods. I think you're gonna like today's episode. It's pretty scary, and it's executive produced by Talon the Raven. Thank you, Talon the Raven. We couldn't have done this episode without you. If any of you out there would also like to become a Scary Stories executive producer, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. We really could use any help we can get to survive this period. On the other hand, we're lucky enough to be able to continue working, hopefully throughout. So we're very grateful for that and excited to still be telling you new Dogman stories every day. I do want to say that we've had very odd YouTube glitching recently. First, we were unable to comment on our own videos and only sometimes on other people's videos. We switched browsers and it seemed to fix itself for about a half hour, then suddenly nobody was able to comment on our channel at all, and I could only get an error screen on my comments page on any device or browser I have access to. If you are seeing and hearing this video, you could do us a huge favor and let us know if commenting is working for you, and also if you're seeing ads or not. Thanks. Hopefully the glitches will get worked out in time. Today, we've got a story about rich young people and how they are spending their lockdown, or whatever you want to call it. It was sent to us by a working class guy, but he's staying for the duration at this... Well, he explains it all in the story, which we call Dogman Crashed Our Shelter-in-Place Party. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm attending a fairly prestigious college on scholarship, the first in my family to do so, and I got invited by a very rich girl to hole up for the duration of the crisis in the fancy mansion of one of her even richer friends. It's a mansion out in the woods, and it would be just a dozen of us from our college. No servants or parents, or any kinds of adults. The entire basement stocked with freezers full of food to last us through the apocalypse, and other niceties it will take me the rest of the story to still not completely list. So what could go wrong, right? I'll tell you what could go wrong. Dogman could go wrong. So, the girl that invited me is someone we can call Marla. She's actually fairly nice considering how well off her family is. She doesn't seem to enjoy pulling the wings off of flies like most of her friends do. I've never seen her join in when someone was being ganged up on. I've never caught her lying or smearing anyone. That's why I started casually dating her after her jock boyfriend dropped her a while back. I figured he'd be back soon, so I was just keeping his seat warm and didn't expect the invitation to come to the mansion when it came. It meant she'd be locked into being my girlfriend for a month, 2 months, however long this thing lasts. That was fine with me, but would she still stay interested in me for that long? Of course, she'd be my captive audience. We'd basically be locked in together. I talked about it with some of my friends, and they all told me that she was out of my league and I should say no and let her invite some rich guy. But that just sounded like such a loser cop-out move to me. Why should some rich guy get to eat for free for 2 or 3 months? He could afford to pay for it. That free food should go to me and me alone. I accepted her invitation, but I set my expectations low. If she dumped me for another guy midway through, my plan was just to lay low and stay out of the way so that I could keep eating for free. Romance is romance, but free food is a priority in times like these. A guy's gotta eat. So Marla picked me up, and I thought we were going to drive to the mansion and start partying. Instead, she drove me to some doctor's waiting room. It took all day to get tested, but apparently nobody was allowed into the party without first passing exams and being tested not just for the famous virus, but for any of them. Then, I thought we were going to the mansion, but we were going to the quarantine quarters. I guess they used to be the servants' quarters. I had to stay there till all the medical results came back. I think it was around 36 hours. Once Marla and I were both cleared, we were invited to the mansion proper. Now, I thought I had been inside a mansion before, but apparently I had only been inside a McMansion. This building we were in was old. I mean, old. It was so old, I think it predated Columbus's discovery of itself. It had room after room filled with shelf after shelf of book after book, all of them looking so old they were probably published before language was invented. I think they were originally blank, and they got filled in after someone created the alphabet. It was also large. I mean, I thought people in past generations were smaller than we are, not taller. So, how come the doors and ceilings in this place are so high up? Everything looks like it was built with more quality than could ever possibly be needed, like it was built to withstand the end of time. Even the banisters and floorboards looked like they could buy and sell my entire family. I was more than out of my league. I had entered a stadium for the wrong sport. When I told my father who I was staying with for the crisis, he chuckled and told me I'm just lucky she likes slumming. It seemed funny when he said it, but staring around at a house where it felt like the chairs and tables looked down on me, I realized that it was stingingly, embarrassingly, extremely true. The guy whose rich parents own this place is named Roger. I've known him vaguely from some class we had together. He's never been nice to me before, but he welcomed me to his home enthusiastically. He gave me and Marla a tour of the part of the mansion we would be using, which is amazingly not all that much of the place. We were told we were to make our own meals and clean up our own messes, and that other than that, there were really no rules. He guided us to a huge bedroom and bath larger than any apartment I've ever lived in, and left us alone to get settled in for our ultra-comfortable prison lockdown room. Marla was ecstatic. She kept saying that it was like a fairy tale bedroom and that I should remember how it looked because this was the bedroom she wants to live in when she gets married. I gave her a look like she was crazy. She's not going to marry me. She's going to marry a rich guy, but whatever. I guess if she wants to pretend for the next month or two that I'm in her social class, what harm is there in it? After all, if people want to be nice to me, I should just let them. We'll have an easier go of it until this situation works itself out. I made the decision just to go along with whatever anyone wants, because I'm basically being treated like a prince at no expense at all. When Marla and I got hungry, we wandered downstairs, getting lost twice, and finally, we found a human that we recognized from school. She told us that there are cabinets and freezers of food downstairs in the basement. According to her, if it wasn't in that basement, then it probably wasn't sold in American supermarkets. The two of us walked downstairs to the basement, and I know I had no idea what I was going to see. Was it going to be an entire Key Food supermarket transplanted under the house? When I hit the bottom step, and my eyes took in the sight for the first time, I have to admit, I gasped in horror. "Coffins!" I shouted, terrified. The entire huge basement was flooded with white coffin after white coffin lined up in rows. Marla giggled and walked past me. "Very funny, Mr. Comedian," she said, as she casually walked over and opened one of the coffins. And that revealed that it was a freezer built in a side shape, sort of like a coffin, not the tall shape I was used to. I was so happy that she thought I was kidding, but I actually thought I had entered some kind of vampire's lair. I opened various of the coffins, freezers, and saw that they really did have anything in them that I could think of, at least if I looked long enough. There was a large pantry room on the side with canned and boxed foods, as well as a room filled with bottled beverages and bottled water. We could entertain an army here for weeks. When Marla and I were up in our room later, I noticed that the one window in the room overlooks a very Hollywood kind of a scene. It was literally a kidney-shaped swimming pool with some of our friends hanging out around it in bathing suits and shades. Now, this was a warm day for March, but not that warm. I pointed it out to Marla, and she told me that the backyard is heated. I was stunned. Heating the outdoors. She laughed at my working-class ignorance and informed me that in the summer, it's also air-conditioned. My parents would view this as the work of Satan, but I'm already getting very used to it. As much fun as all this is, I find myself needing to get away from the others at least once or twice a day. I am the only one interested in taking walks around the grounds. I've got a love of the smell of the forest, and since this place is surrounded by it, I get a lot of what I love. Now comes the part that you're all waiting for. The first time I noticed the Dogman. I had gone for a walk to be by myself, and on this particular day I stayed out longer than usual. I just liked the feeling of nobody talking. No voices in my head, only the wind whispering in my ears. It's so peaceful in those rare moments when you get to be truly alone. And then I noticed it was getting dark, and it was long past time to be heading back to the house. Marla might have found another guy already. You gotta look alive if you want to keep getting the free meals and the pretty girlfriends. I started heading back toward the mansion, but as I got to the edge of the tree line at the back of the yard, something caught my attention, and I froze to a halt. I wasn't the only one in those woods. I could see someone else staring through the leaves into the yard. I turned my head and allowed my eyes to follow where the figure was looking, and it turned out it was looking at some of the girls playing in the water, splashing each other and squealing. I figured it was some sort of peeping Tom, so I started marching toward his position, but still remaining under the cover of the woods. I did not emerge into the backyard or try to draw attention to myself. I was intending to tell the guy sternly to stop staring at the young women. I was not planning on starting any sort of big fight with the guy or drawing attention to him or threatening him with arrest or anything like that. I just wanted him to know that what he was doing was unwelcome, and then I hoped that he would be cool about it and just go away. As I got closer, I could make out more detail. What at first was just a dark silhouette of a body with a head hidden behind a tree, looking out to my right at the pool area, coalesced into a hairy, fur-covered body, like some animal, not a man. I wondered if it might be a homeless man wearing an animal skin, although I had never seen such a thing in my life. Still, I was seeing animal fur, and I was seeing an upright figure much like a man. I changed my manner of approach. I was no longer rushing brashly toward him to lecture him on his impropriety. I was now stealthily making my way through the foliage and underbrush, under branches and around tree trunks, ever closer, trying to get a better view of exactly what kind of animal or person that thing was. When I finally saw its back and legs in full, I let out a gasp before I even realized that I did it. The thing was both a man and an animal. It was shaped like a human, but had fur like an animal. And when I gasped, I got an even bigger shock as the head of the creature came into view. It was not a human head. It looked a whole lot like the head of Anubis from Egyptian mythology. They say Anubis was a dog or jackal-headed god. Maybe that's what I saw. When I gasped, it flitted away. I mean, it nearly flew away. It was gone so quickly. I'm not saying it sprouted wings. I just mean it was gone much faster than it should have been able to go. It was not just an animal, whatever that animal was. As I saw it leave, I watched its back legs. They were not like my legs or your legs. They were like the hind legs of a dog, or a wolf, or some other kind of canine. It just turned and seemed to enter the express lane of some highway I couldn't see, and then it was gone. I stood there for a while, seeing it in my mind, trying to understand what I saw, kind of stunned by the thing. In my mind, I was not reacting like, I just saw the Dogman, I'm going to call Vic Cundiff, because I wasn't thinking of it as Dogman yet. I was thinking of it as the peeping Tom that turned out to have fur all over its body, and a head resembling Anubis that might in fact have been a manifestation of the god form Anubis. Do you know what I mean? I was still going around in circles with the bits that I did know about what I had just experienced, but I had not calmed down enough yet for my conscious mind to take a look at all the concepts my subconscious was juggling. I didn't tell anybody what happened, because I wouldn't have been sure what to tell them anyway. That night, Marla kept me up late, and I did all she wanted me to do, and I did it with a smile, but a big part of me was a million miles away. When I was finally allowed to sleep, I had an intense and terrifying dream. It wasn't a nightmare exactly. It was a dream with a lot of foreboding in it, a feeling of deep paranoia and anxiety and fear. I was talking to a man I knew who lived in the forest. When I looked at him more closely, I recognized the man as being myself, but myself in those moments when I was in the woods watching the Dogman. I saw how pale I looked, how frightened and worried. The scared version of me turned and looked right at me and sent a chill through me. And then I told myself, we think we're 12, a dozen souls in this forest, but the Dogman is here, and the Dogman makes it unlucky 13. I might be paraphrasing from the dream. I didn't write it down when I woke up, but that's basically what I was saying. Dogman makes it 13. Dogman makes it unlucky to be here. Dogman takes a good thing and sours it. Once I awoke from that dream, I realized I was calling the thing Dogman. I was assuming I knew what it was, and I knew that its intentions couldn't possibly be benign. That night, I guess this was Saturday night, we had a pool party. Roger turned the heat up high in the backyard and the wine was flowing. At some point after dark, Roger called for a game of hide and seek in the backyard. There isn't anything in the backyard to hide behind or inside, so he must have really been talking about playing hide and seek in that forest, at night, in the dark, with everyone plastered. And I remembered, with a Dogman that looks like Anubis, and has a keen interest in human females. I advised against playing the game, which made people laugh at me. I saw them all stagger into the woods to play their dumb game. I wondered how many I would get to see staggering back out. Someone had to do something, and obviously that someone was going to have to be me. But what could I do? I looked around, my mind blank, no ideas to be had. And then I saw the outdoor lighting system, a bank of lights that we had never turned on while I had been out there. If I could turn those lights on, it would be too bright for the Dogman to come around. At least I hope so. I looked and I found no on or off switch, though. There was nobody there to ask, no servants or adults, as I had said earlier. I followed the electric cord and discovered that it led back inside, down the side of a flight of steps into a basement, to what looked like a bunch of light switches. I flipped them all on and ran back up the steps. As I reached the top, I heard 2, then 3 distinct female screams coming from the backyard. I stuck my head outside into the bright as daylight backyard that I had lit up like it was Yankee Stadium during the World Series. I had turned on more lights than I knew existed, and everything was visible clearly, like we were watching a TV sitcom with flood lighting. And when I say everything was visible, I also mean the dog-headed figure resembling Anubis that had caused the women to erupt in screams. I only saw it for a second before it melted backward into nature itself, but I saw it. I recognized it. I had seen it before. Barely avoiding being trampled in the run indoors, I was relieved that I had saved my acquaintances from the Anubis Dogman without having to actually use words like Dogman to get them to come inside. I had allowed them to see for themselves. Because they had seen it with their own eyes, they told me that we should all stay indoors after sundown from now on. I didn't even have to suggest it, I could just agree to it. I let them understand the truth on their own terms. I never had to find words to tell anyone that. Dogman crashed our shelter-in-place party. We're back with 2 more all-new, allegedly true Dogman stories, and I hope you are all well and safe. Today's show is executive produced by none other than JWM, maker of music. Thank you, JWM. We couldn't do it without you. If you would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like JWM, simply join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. If that's not something you can do right now, we understand. But there are other ways you can help us out a lot. Clicking like on the video, subscribing, hitting the notifications bell, putting our video on a playlist, and sharing it with your friends who you think might like it, all help keep the channel alive, and we appreciate all of those things. If you're a troll, you can help us too. Just leave a comment complaining that we have ads, and we'll know to block your account from leaving comments. That doesn't just help the channel, it helps everybody. All joking aside, today's stories are pretty scary, and both took place this year. The second one is my favorite. It's called Dogman Made Me Look Stupid in Front of My Girlfriend, and that one took place back in February. This first one, though, is more recent. In fact, it's still going on right now as far as I know. It's about a guy trying to be alone right now through the current world situation. He's very paranoid about staying away from anyone or anything that might carry disease on it. Recently, stories have spread about other animals, such as cats, possibly being able to spread certain contagions. We can't begin to wonder if Dogman could carry illness that would affect humans until we first prove that such a creature exists and have one examined by doctors and scientists. So, imagine you're the guy who sent us this email, locked away in the middle of nowhere, in a cabin, And outside, constantly bothering him, is something that sure seems to resemble a North American upright walking canid. We call this story Dogman Won't Give Me Space. Dear Scary Stories, NYC. I fled like so many of my neighbors to second homes in the country at the beginning of this current crisis situation. I loaded my car down with supplies and drove out here to where I am now, at an undisclosed location in the hills in Pennsylvania. As guilty as it makes me feel, I really enjoyed the alone time I was getting for the first day or two. But then, I was discovered by a local apex predator, and since then, Dogman won't give me space. My building back in the city is full of older people who are not well, and I admit, I'm afraid of going back there. The place I'm at here in the country is truly lovely, and it's secreted away in a manner that I don't even think I should explain to you. Suffice to say, it's deliberately hard to find. It means that the chances of being bothered by neighbors are close to zero, but it also means it's harder for police or fire or medical people to get here as well. This place is private with a capital P, both the good and the bad aspects of that. Since I've had a social phobia my entire life, and have recently been developing a fear of germs and disease, I feel extremely comforted by the severe anonymity of this location. I felt safe for the first day and a half or so. The house is completely surrounded by woods, and my car, or my escape vehicle as I've begun to think of it, is secreted in a shelter hidden in those aforementioned woods. I've joked with friends and family that the house is hidden from everyone except me, God, and Bigfoot. But the joke doesn't make me laugh any longer, now that I've been discovered by an actual Pennsylvania dogman. Dogman was something I used to always laugh about. I remember I had a friend when I was growing up who really believed in that Dogman home movie. What was it called? The Gable film? The Grable film? He used to argue with me that there was no way a human being could have faked that footage. Then one night, we were watching some TV show about Dogman, and the guy who hoaxed the original home movie got in a ghillie suit and ran toward the camera on all fours. It looked identical. My friend was so bummed out that it was a hoax, he felt so betrayed. A previous television program had told him that such a thing couldn't be done by a man. So he had believed that statement as a fact. It had been spoken on television, and so he felt it must be true. I had a good long laugh about it that night, and again whenever it popped into my mind. I felt that believing in Dogman was as dumb as believing in anything else they said on TV. For years, I felt that the Dogman was something impossible to believe in, as anything but the punchline to a joke. Now the joke's on me. It all started my second or third night here in the cabin. I call it a cabin, but it's got 2 stories and 4 to 6 bedrooms, depending on how you furnish it. 4 formal bedrooms upstairs. It's cozy yet roomy by cabin standards. There's an HVAC system currently set to heating the place. Actually, I currently have it turned off, and I'm about to explain why. On that second or third night, I woke up to a horrible odor. At first I thought rubber tires were burning. Then I thought it was something biological, or formerly biological. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights, looking all around. It smelled like something had died in the room with me, possibly something very large. I quieted my heavy breathing because I thought I heard an odd sound coming from inside the walls, or possibly outside the cabin. I was eventually able to determine the direction it was coming from, over by the air intake near the northwest corner of the house. I peered sideways out of the window there, and I saw to my complete and total surprise that there was what I at first took to be a giant bear rubbing its back up against the corner of the house and the metal air intake grill. Or maybe it was the exhaust? Was the creature enjoying the warm air blowing out? Or was it getting its back fur vacuumed? Whatever was happening, it seemed to be enjoying itself and scratching its itch. I couldn't believe a bear was rubbing against the cabin on the one hand, and I couldn't believe it smelled worse than 5 rotten skunks on the other. It was just a night for surprises. I already was wondering if the heating system was going to smell like that permanently. I thought maybe this wasn't the first time this bear has been up there, scratching his back. And if that's the case, then maybe the bad smell will go away after a while. Only I was soon to discover that wasn't a bear, and it had never been to my cabin before. It was a Dogman, and it was leaving its stench on my ventilation system, knowing full well what it was doing. It was marking me with its odor. It was marking me and my house as its turf, as its property. If I had understood that in the moment, I think I would have started packing and headed back to the city in the morning. As it is, I'm still seriously considering doing it. Each morning, I wake up wanting to go back home to New York City, to one of the epicenters of this crisis. After each peaceful day, though, I keep telling myself the Dogman is gone, and I'll have my personal space that night, and for the rest of this situation. It wasn't until the second night of it scratching its rancid back on my airflow system that I got a good enough look at it to understand I was not in a funky Disney nature documentary. I was locked inside a low-budget Tobe Hooper-style 1970s Monster in the Woods kind of motion picture. I am locked inside a particularly deranged monster flick. It's probably the second feature at a drive-in, made entirely by a group of insane hippies. And nobody can possibly guess what'll happen next, since the entire film was improvised while they were tripping. Okay, I'm probably getting dramatic because I am feeling sorry for myself, but I'm no worse off than anyone and a lot better off than most. All I want is my space, and if only that Dogman would leave me alone, I would have it. So, what do I mean when I say Dogman? What exactly is getting me in such a tizzy? Well, I'll be honest with you, it's just a big dog. A big dog that somehow is able to walk on its hind legs. It's not a guy in a ghillie suit, and it doesn't even seem to walk on all fours like that fake Dogman did way back then. This Dogman, the one that won't leave me alone, and smells like he passed away 5 months ago, this one just looks like a really big, black dog that stands on its hind legs and walks around looking like some kind of a devil thing. I know that it's bipedal, as in it walks around on its 2 hind legs, but this is not something that walks like a man. I don't really know what to compare it to, as it moves differently from any living creature I've ever been exposed to. Possibly it might be best to compare it to the way an ostrich moves, or other 2-legged birds, but its legs bend differently from those of a bird or of a human. They bend like those of a canine, and that impacts on the manner in which it struts along. The heel is held up in the air, not on the ground as with a human. The way it moves is different from start to finish than the way a human does. That's basically what I mean. Yet, it accomplishes the same thing, and apparently even more efficiently, as I've seen this creature go from a relaxed state to a run so fast that it just looked like a blur to my eyes. It can move so quickly that I find it utterly terrifying. It moves faster than I can see or think. There's no defense against such a thing, not even if I armed myself to the teeth. Even if I tried to fire on it, I could only ever hit it on a fluke. I may as well fire straight up in the air as aim at it. If something that fast wanted to get into this house, I would think that it could do so easily. In fact, if it wanted to utterly destroy my entire home, I wouldn't see how that would take it more than an hour or two maximum. It could get in at me any time with little effort, and yet it has not done so. Does that mean it bears no ill will toward me? If it bore me no ill will, then it wouldn't come around again each night, every night, from sundown to sunrise. It wouldn't tap on my bedroom window to keep me from falling asleep. It wouldn't stomp around on the roof over my bed to wake me from a deep sleep. That creature wants me in torment. It wants me sleep-deprived. It wants me confused. And above all, it wants me frightened. That's why it hasn't broken in here yet. Because it's farming me. For my fear. That doesn't mean it won't break in eventually. I mean, it might grow bored of the normal stress it exerts on me. And one night, it might want that extra bit of fear you get from scaring a person to death. Or maybe it might find someone with tastier fear, and it might decide to finish me off once and for all. It might leave me insane. It might end me completely. If I eventually grow used to it being there, and I'm not scared anymore, it might have no reason left not to finish me off. As I write this to you, it's growing dark out. It's too late for today for me to consider driving back to the city. Maybe the Dogman won't show up tonight. Maybe the whole thing is over. But if it does come tonight, then I hope I have the courage in the morning to pack as much food and TP as I can fit back in my car and head on home to the city. But I don't want to be in the city. I want to be out here. During the days, I feel so safe here, so protected. I've taken to napping during the day since the Dogman won't let me sleep at night. Sometimes when I'm enjoying a luxuriant nap on the couch with the sun beaming in the window on me, I think it's worth the trade-off. Is it really so bad to have to be scared out of your wits all night? If you can enjoy afternoons in the sun, resting, in silence and peace, with no fear of any airborne malefactors. It seems a cheap price to pay during these days, especially when coupled with the thought of packing the car and driving for hours and hours. When I was so tired, I decided to nap just a little while longer, and then, when I wake up, and then, it's growing dark again, and I know it's too late to go for that day. I know I have to get ready for another night of torment. After all, if the Dogman doesn't scare me out of my mind, it might get angry and be forced to do something far worse to get its fix of fear from me. This is what life has descended into for me. One set of fears propelling the other set until we roll down the hill and crash at the bottom. I'm going to have to find a way to regain my energy. I'm going to need to think more clearly. I'm going to have to forcibly stop the wheel of karma before something else does it more painfully. I think my choices are to run away back to my German-fested building, try to do something to make the Dogman go away, or continue to do nothing and descend into madness at best. Nobody that can put me up is within driving distance, and I have a feeling the hotels and motels must be closed by now. What would you do if you were in my situation? I guess risking going back into the city is the best option, but then again, I always think that as the sun goes down out here. Maybe I'll drive home tomorrow, or maybe I'll still be here, in which case I'll be checking out the comments to see if any of you have a clearer head than I have. I hope you're all keeping safe, and that we can get through this sooner rather than later. It's cold here, and I can't turn on the heat because it smells so bad. I know the creature is coming back soon. Because Dogman won't give me space. Dogman made me look stupid in front of my girlfriend. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I hope you are well when you get this email. I am grateful to be staying with my mom and dad and my sister and her boyfriend. Well, I'm not that grateful about her boyfriend. He's kind of creepy if you ask me, but basically I'm glad to have a room to sleep in and food to eat while I wait until there's some work and I can move out again. I was supposed to be staying for the duration with my girlfriend, but she is my ex-girlfriend now because Dogman made me look stupid in front of my girlfriend. Let's call my ex Loretta, which is not her real name. Loretta and I had been living together in her apartment for 9 or 10 months in February, and she was the first person I knew who was taking the crisis we're in seriously weeks before everyone else. She told me she wanted to go camping in the woods, but she had a feeling it wouldn't be possible for a long time once this situation hit the United States. So we hopped in her trailer and we drove someplace. I honestly don't even know where. It was either in Michigan or Wisconsin, and it was in the middle of nowhere. We were not in a trailer camp. We were off a dirt road in the woods. She just found it by accident, as far as I know. Our first night was actually fun. We stayed in the trailer and played old board games. The second night, Loretta wanted to build a fire outside in the cold and toast marshmallows. I mean, it was February, near the Great Lakes, in the woods. It was cold, and the wind whipped through, sending icy chills through you and whistling at you rudely as if to say, "Why aren't you locked safely indoors?" I suggested to Loretta that we wait until the next night to have a fire. In fact, I suggested we start the fire when the sun was still up. She mocked my weakness and started collecting firewood. I followed along with her, complaining. She ordered me to look for firewood in one given direction, and I wandered away from her. If a whiner whines in the forest, but nobody is there to hear him, did he really actually whine? I'll never know the answer to that question because in my case, there was a sick-looking, but very tall, dog-headed humanoid nightmare man standing there behind a tree, looking at me with his head cocked to the side. He heard every bit of my whining. Therefore, I must have actually whined. And then I cried, and I wet myself, and I ran back toward Loretta, who saw me coming and burst out in hysterical laughter. I ran back inside her trailer, and I wouldn't come out all night. I washed myself and changed into clean clothing, but I was an emotional wreck. Loretta remained outside, set up her fire, and toasted marshmallows for hours, enjoying the hell out of herself. She told me she never heard or saw a single other soul out there that night. No dogman, catman, scatman, or bear, she said, making fun of me. I couldn't believe how disrespectful she was being when I had just endured a traumatic shock. I told her in detail what I saw, and now I'll tell you. She laughed and called me names. She didn't believe it was real. She said I probably saw Fifi the poodle and overreacted. But what I saw was not a poodle. What I saw was a full-fledged monster. First of all, it stood taller than I stand, and I am almost 6 feet tall. Second of all, it was entirely fur-covered, and it looked like it was covered in mud or poo or something nasty. If that were my dog, I would want to give it a bath and then a brushing. But this was not my dog. This was a creature that stood up on its hind legs and walked with its hands out in front of it. Or maybe they were claws, not hands exactly, but still, it walked like a monster from an old black and white movie. The way they used to hold their hands out in front as though they were going to grab you. This looked like that, and it kind of leaned its body bent in a question mark shape so it could twist around the tree and get a better look at me. The way its eyelids peeled back at the same time its gums did revealed these huge broken teeth and giant crazy eyes in massive sockets. I remember screaming like a girl in a horror movie, even though I am a man. Loretta told me she's not so sure about that anymore, though. Not after the way I acted. I think she's cruel and selfish. She would make fun of men returning from battle. She's so sure she knows better than everyone else. But I bet she'd faint dead away if she ran into the boogeyman with a dog head that I saw, leaning around that tree to stare at me. So anyway, Loretta doesn't believe anything I say to her. In fact, she's not even speaking to me any longer. I didn't have much time to get out of her apartment before the current situation was fully in place. I'm lucky my parents were able to let me come back here. It kind of feels bad in some ways to have to return home and live with my mom and dad, but they're not being mean about it, and so far it's been tolerable. It would have been a lot nicer in Loretta's apartment. I really liked it there, and even though she could be nasty, I'll still miss her. But I'll never be back with her ever again because Dogman made me look stupid in front of my girlfriend. Chased to my cabin by Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my friend and I have camped together since we were 15 years old, and we love to camp in all weather. We're in our 30s now, but we still try to get out at least 2 or 3 times a year together, once in winter, once in summer, and then sometimes we go out in either autumn or spring. I was especially looking forward to camping this year in late February in Pennsylvania. As it turned out, due to his fear of the oncoming virus situation, my buddy did not show up, and in his place instead, I found the Dogman. When we started camping as younger people, we liked to brave the weather and camp in tents on the snow. Since we've gotten older, we do that far less and are more likely to rent a heated cabin to sleep in. Okay, let's just be honest. These days we talk about maybe sleeping in a tent on the snow, but we actually rent a heated cabin. In this case, I had gotten us a 2-bedroom cabin with a kitchen, indoor plumbing, and a shower. All the comforts of home out in the wilderness of the Gifford Pinchot State Park. The thing is, my friend is very germ conscious, as he has a right to be, and he had been following the situation overseas since I guess January. He grew increasingly unhappy and nervous about it and tried to talk me into canceling our trip. I felt that his arguments were making a case for why we should go. It was the last time we would be able to hang out in nature together until the crisis passed. Who knows how long that'll take? Out in nature, you'd hardly come into contact with any humans at all. It would be one of the safest places in the world to be. I felt he was arguing for why we needed to go. He kept caving to my wishes at the end of each of our phone calls, but then the night before we were to leave for the cabin, my buddy canceled out on me. I decided to make the trip alone since I wasn't sure I could get a refund anyhow. Why not stay in a cabin alone for a week with what was about to happen coming on? And so I found myself in a 2-bedroom cabin, entirely alone, in the Pinchot State Park, which is gorgeous no matter what time of year. There were very few others there, but it was not abandoned by any means. Not yet, anyway. I took to spending my days walking around Pinchot Lake, and it was a good, peaceful, quiet time in which I felt my batteries recharge. The night before my last day there, though, I encountered something so horrifying and emotionally draining that, in my opinion, mere words cannot truly describe it. I saw an actual, real-life Pennsylvania Dogman. Here's how it all happened. I was on the far end of the lake before I noticed it was starting to get dark, and since I was walking around the end and heading back anyway, I just kept going at the same pace. I didn't really care if it got dark. I felt that I was in a state park, and therefore it would be safe to walk through alone at night. You should never think something as stupid as that. State parks are wilderness areas with flush toilets installed. They are not kiddie parks. You need to watch yourself because wild animals live in state parks, and some of them are sometimes hungry. So, I was walking back, or I guess when you're in nature you call it hiking, back to the cabin when I thought I heard someone trailing me. I looked around, and I didn't notice anyone. Now you need to understand this is not a heavily wooded area. There are some trees around, but it isn't like we were in the woods. I thought I had a clear vision under the moonlight in 360 degrees, but somehow, whoever I was hearing, I was not also seeing. I resumed hiking, and there was that sound again. It didn't sound like an echo of my steps. It sounded like someone else would walk when I walked and stop when I stopped. And yet, with another cursory glance around, I still saw nobody there. I began to wonder if solitude was making my brain create imaginary playmates that I could hear but not see. I had a streak of fear shoot through me that I was beginning to hear imaginary sounds. If I lost my mind, how would I make judgments for the sake of my own survival? I began to sort of spin in place, looking all around, and then I started walking, continuing to spin clockwise, then counterclockwise, trying not to make myself dizzy. I wanted to see in all directions while walking. I wanted to see what was following me. In fact, when I behaved this way, I heard no more sounds of being followed. Either I had psyched out my pursuer, or if I was actually going insane, then I had psyched out my own psyche. Satisfied that the situation had been dealt with one way or another, and to ease my growing dizziness, I returned to hiking in the normal manner, eager to get back to the solitary boredom yet relative safety of the cabin. As soon as I took a few steps, I heard something following me once again. This time, I turned in the direction I heard the sound, and I saw it. Darting out from behind one tree and then hiding its form behind another, there was something not completely unlike a man, and yet entirely inhuman. I saw a canine-headed bipedal creature with shaggy, matted-looking fur. It was an old-looking, massive male of whatever unknown species he represented. He must have been older to have had time to grow that large, as he seemed taller than I was, even though he hunched down to make himself appear smaller as he ran. And yes, this bull cryptid ran on his hind legs. The way its legs were shaped, I was reminded of a centaur or a minotaur, but instead of hooves at the bottom, he had long talon-like claws at the end of canine-looking paws. The dog-like head was basically an excuse for the longest rows of the tallest teeth I had ever borne witness to. It was like this dog had his jaws enlarged to fit dentures made from a tyrannosaur. This was the most terrifying and evil-looking creature I had ever seen. Every part of its biology seemed to have been designed to tear apart other living things. It was not just a walking death machine that I was witnessing lurking behind me. It was an epic, mythic bringer of pain and sadness. The Pennsylvania Dogman may be a real animal, but even after seeing it with my own eyes, I can't rule out that it may also be something other than that. I'm not even sure what I'm saying, but I've seen bear from 50 feet away, and they look like family pets compared to this thing. This wolfman creature wanted to end my story, and he wanted to end it in a really nasty manner. He wasn't just out looking for food to survive like a bear. You can't call a bear evil for trying to survive. This Dogman, or whatever you want to call it, he didn't just want to eat. He wanted to bring fear. He wanted to bring sadness. And I think most of all, he was looking forward to bringing great and pointless, needless pain into this world. We call it our pain when we experience it, but pain is pain. It's everybody's pain. It's inevitable. It will always return. But to bring it into existence when it doesn't really need to be, that to me is evil. And to me, the Dogman was and is evil. I wasn't just afraid for my life. I was afraid of the utter vacuum of darkness that seemed to be inside that monster. I ran. I was by that point maybe an 8-minute walk from the cabin area. I needed to get there faster. I began crying, thinking of all the people I wished I could have said goodbye to. I wished I had called my family the previous night. I wished I had gotten one last chance to talk to some of my other friends. But such was not meant to be. Maybe I could visit them when I was a ghost if I became a ghost. I chuckled as I cried to myself, and I ran. I had always wanted to know if there was life after death, and I guess the Dogman might be about to answer that question for me. I saw the cabins, and a couple of people milling around outside. I felt elation in my chest, then turned around to see the creature out in the open, pursuing me still. I screamed and found extra energy, racing as I had never raced in my life. I did not stop until I was back in my cabin. I think the Dogman must have come close to the cabin area because I heard someone screaming behind me as I locked my door. Of course, they could have been screaming for any number of reasons. At any rate, the rest of the night was quiet, so I don't think the Dogman came any closer than that to the camping area. I was already scheduled to leave the following day, so that's basically the end of my story. I went from being alone by the lake with the Dogman to being alone back in the city, watching as many videos about Dogman as I can find. I had heard about him before, but I never really thought something like that could actually be real, and living in the United States of America. Honestly, it just blows my mind how these things could possibly be here, and yet remain officially unknown to science. That's why I can't rule out supernatural explanations like the Navajo skinwalkers or paranormal explanations such as that these things may be from alternate timelines or other realities. How can we be able to track bear but not these creatures if they are just another kind of wild animal? It also leaves open, in my mind, the idea that, as crazy as this sounds, werewolves might somehow be real. I mean, where do the Dogmen go to after people encounter them? Do they just disappear? Do they turn into their human forms? Do they return to their other realities? If they are from our prehistoric past, where are the skeletons of ancient Dogmen? If they're from the future, how do they travel in time? I've had nothing in my mind but questions since the day that I was chased to my cabin by the Dogman.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
My, what a nice spring evening. Wow, whatever made that howl sure sounded close. It's amazing how even the prettiest spring sunset can turn scary when there's a chance that the Dogman may be near. I'm Madeline Starr, and I'll be hosting the Dogman Scary Springtime Special right here on Scary Stories NYC. And now, here's another scary Dogman story.
And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, And then, every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.